Good morning, everybody. Very nervous, so. All right. I want to say how grateful I am to be here this morning. I am here to share about how vulnerability and desperation have been a part of my recovery journey. Many of you have heard my testimony before, so I will not go into detail about that, but will simply share that over a 15-year period, I went from a prescription pill addiction that started from a legitimate prescription for fibromyalgia, later into full-blown alcoholism, and later an addiction to crack cocaine. I now live with the consequences of my choices. Many days I feel debilitated by guilt and shame. I live with constant physical pain from a back injury that happened a couple of years ago. My teeth are damaged beyond repair. I have done damage to my body in ways I do not even understand. I know that I have done horrible damage to my 12-year-old daughter, who has been traumatized by my addiction. It was only a year ago when my boyfriend of 10 years died. For 4 months prior to his death, he was on hospice, so my attention was on him. It was during his last weeks when he was nonverbal that I met God, or should I say, where God met me. In my grief, sadness, fear, and confusion, in utter desperation, I cried out to him. I was desperate for a miracle. I needed Jesus more than ever. Being vulnerable and desperate isn't pretty, but it is necessary in order to grow. In my suffering, I grew in my relationship with Jesus. He took the obsession away and brought peace. Along my journey, I've had many seeds planted and many people who loved me when I couldn't love myself. I also participate in an IOP class for the past 2 years, 2 nights a week. I participated in these classes for a long time while I was actively using. It was not until the obsession was taken away from me during this time of desperation that I was able to really dig into the actual application of recovery principles that began to register in meaningful ways. This brings me to the 12 steps of AA. I have now done my inventory 4 times and am working on them again. One part of the steps is in taking a daily inventory. This has been a significant part of confronting myself. Part of this inventory is listing your resentments and then assessing what role I played in what happened. It is not about focusing on others' fault, but on acknowledging the part we played. It is not easy to admit our character defects and our sin, but what are we seeking? Growth, to be a better person, and to selflessly love like Jesus. Assessing our fears is another part of our daily inventory. When we run on fear, we are likely running on self-will rather than relying on our higher power. So we need to pray and surrender our fear to Jesus. This is easier said than done. I continue to do a daily inventory. While it is very hard to do, there is something beautiful in vulnerability. Through all of this, I want to testify that God keeps his promises. He is a good God. He dwells within us because of our goodness, not because of our accomplishments, but because he desires to be in relationship with us. He has chosen us. How beautiful and amazing is that? He wants us to show up authentically in our desperation, even when it's not pretty. It has not been easy to look myself in the mirror and reflect on my past and acknowledge unhealed trauma, character defects, and layers of grief I have for the loss of so many precious things that I forfeited in pursuit of drugs. In my sobriety, I am learning how to allow myself to feel my feelings instead of running away from them. I'm learning to leave them at the feet of Jesus. He saved me. Today I have clarity. I'm a present mom. I am a child of God worthy of love. He has continued to bless me in so many ways. Walking with Jesus has been nothing short of a miracle. He gave me salvation, is restoring my life, and gives me hope. What a privilege that God took a sinner like me, washed me with grace, and set me free. For me, this is what vulnerability looks like. I'm worried about being judged by you, but I am also convinced that it is by being honest with myself, God, and others that I will gain greater levels of freedom. I understand I must confront myself fully, things that were done to me, things I've done to myself, and things that I've done to others. And as excruciating as reality is, this is a mandatory component of my recovery. I have a friend who tells me that I must wrestle with myself and with God in order to become who He has made me to be. I wonder if I, as a recovering addict, could encourage you to include some of these practices into your daily life and lean more into vulnerability. And then real quickly, I was just going to share from my big book. This story happens to be called Freedom from Bondage. And this story, little part in the story right here is specifically referring to step 4. Okay. I've had many spiritual experiences since I've been in the program, many that I didn't recognize right away, for I'm slow to learn and they take many guises. But one thing was so outstanding that I like to pass it on whenever I can in the hope that it will help someone else, as it has me. As I said earlier, self-pity and resentment were my constant companions, and my inventory began to look like a 33-year diary, for I seemed to have a resentment against everybody I had ever known. All but one responded to the treatment suggested in the steps immediately, but this one posed a problem. This resentment was against my mother, and it was 25 years old. I had fed it, fanned it, and nurtured it as one might a delicate child, and it had become as much a part of me as my breathing. It provided me with excuses for my lack of education, my marital failures, personal failures, inadequacy, and course of alcoholism. And though I really thought I had been willing to part with it, now I knew I was reluctant to let it go. One morning, however, I realized I had to get rid of it, for my reprieve was running out. And if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk. And I didn't want to get drunk anymore. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. I looked through them. A banner across one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which I caught the word resentment. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will, pray for the person or the thing you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them, and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you will find you have come to mean it, and you want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. Thank you for letting me share.
Well, I'm not certain that I would need to preach anything today. But in the tradition of all preachers everywhere, all the time, I'm going to preach anyway, right? Yeah. So thank you. And as we have worked this together, then my appreciation for the, courage to do this has built. So thank you. So did you notice any vulnerability as she spoke? Yeah. Is that important? That's what today's message is all about. Is vulnerability important? So I'm going to repeat a couple of times something that I believe entirely, and I'd ask you to measure as I preach. And so I have been in pursuit of being free and whole most of my adult life. You can read from that I didn't feel free and whole. I didn't use the word resentment. However, there was bitterness for sure. Which I'm not sure there's a lot of difference there. And so that's why we could talk so easily with each other. And so the statement is that there is no path to freedom and wholeness outside of vulnerability. None. There is no path to freedom and wholeness and peace and hope and all the good things that we want aside from vulnerability. So a question connected to that is, did Jesus exhibit vulnerability in going from living with Father in heaven to living here on earth where people were going to mock him and kill him? Was there vulnerability in that? Yeah. So is he our example? Yes, he is. And there's other examples. So it ends up that King David went through similar things to what we go through. And he is called a man after God's own heart in spite of a couple of things that we're going to talk about right now. So the first one I'm going to talk about, I should read my notes periodically. So I'll make the question even more direct. I desire freedom. So does responding in fear lead to freedom or bondage? Say it louder. Yeah. So does shame lead to freedom or bondage? So does hope happen from fear? No, it does not. No. So that's the sort of stuff that I'm going to talk about. And David is an excellent example of that. So in Psalm 51, I'll read this first and then pay attention to, is David being vulnerable from stuff I'm going to read. A background a little bit for Psalm 51 is David, when he was king, then he saw a woman that he desired, and he took her. Could be that he raped her, and for sure he had her husband killed in the army. You could say he murdered him. And so he wasn't looking at that. He was trying to be invulnerable to that information. And so God provided a prophet by the name of Nathan to challenge him really directly for all of this stuff. And so he ended up sleeping with Bathsheba. There was a son, and then later on there was another son as well. But after David was challenged by Nathan, he wrote Psalm 51. And remember, what he wrote in Psalm 51 was available to the entire nation. So as I read this, pay attention to vulnerability. Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O Lord, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from iniquity and cleanse me from sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So that last part, for sure, David committed adultery, murder, all sorts of lousy stuff. And yet he says he sinned only against God. Well, how about Uriah, the guy that was killed? Did he sin against him? And how about Bathsheba, who was married to a guy and the king took her anyway? So how is it that he sinned against God? Well, I can tell you that dishonoring Bathsheba was dishonoring Bathsheba's maker, because she's made in the image of God. If I dishonor you or you dishonor someone, then it's the same thing. We are sinning not just against that person, we're sinning against God, because they bear God's image. Do you see? So the idea of being able to attack people just because I disagree with them, have we had some of that in our culture? To do that is dishonoring to God. So that's where that comes from. But in addition to that, did you see the confession of sin? Yes. Is confessing sin publicly a place of vulnerability? It is. So I'll read the definition. Vulnerability. What does it mean to be vulnerable? It's to be susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. Has anybody felt vulnerable in here this morning? Yeah, that's where we come from. If I am unwilling to, apply this to David, if I am unwilling to confess my sin, a big part of what I'm saying is that I don't feel safe with Father. Do you think that David felt safe with Father? Yeah, I think he did, because he was willing to call on him to have mercy and to, according to God's steadfast love. Do you think David knew enough about God to know that he could be vulnerable with him? Yes. Do we spend much of our lives trying to be invulnerable to God and the people around us, and maybe especially to ourselves? Do I really want to face who I really am? Is that about right? Do I really want to face who I really am? Am I willing to take inventory? Well, in this case, David couldn't avoid it because Nathan put it right in his face. So he took the inventory and he took the steps of vulnerability to be restored. So here's a universal. What we get to think about and say to ourselves and to God every day is, do I trust him? That isn't just true for God, that's true in every relationship. One of the things that you are considering right now is whether you can trust me, right? And when people get married, my wife's over here, we are color coordinated. I planned it that way, right? No, okay, moving on. So when we get married, that's one of the things we're saying, I'm going to entrust myself to you. So as disciples, are we challenged with that? Do you trust other disciples? That's an interesting question, right? So vulnerability, without vulnerability, there is no road to freedom and wholeness and peace and hope. Starting to buy it? So we're going to look at this more closely in another one of David's Psalms. This is Psalm 32. And the background to this is that before King Saul was dead, then Samuel the prophet anointed David as the next king. It ended up that Saul wanted his own son to be the next king. It also ended up that he recognized in David that God was with him. The Holy Spirit was in David, and the Holy Spirit had been removed from Saul. And when that happened, Saul, he didn't become vulnerable. He tried to become invulnerable by killing David. He was trying to make so that God was not able to accomplish his purpose by killing him. All right? That's the background here. So he went chasing David through Judah, all over the place in the wilderness, and God over and over rescued David. Over and over David was able to say, God rescued me here. God rescued me here. God rescued me here. Was that enough for him to remain vulnerable? No. In Psalm 32, it says, blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven. There is that confession again, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. What's deceit? Lying? Yeah, this shows up in the story. Going on in Psalm 32. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. So that comes from God convicting us of our sin. God's hand is heavy upon me when I sin. When I don't feel that heavy hand and I'm still sinning, it's because I'm becoming immune to him. That's a really dangerous place to be immune to God's influence. My strength was dried up as the heat of the day. So there's the conviction. And going on, I acknowledged my sin to you. This is David talking to God, but letting everybody see it. I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. So we had an example of that just a little bit ago. The courage to take inventory and to acknowledge our sin and to stop covering our iniquity. Is that a place of vulnerability? You bet it is. If you've never done it, I dare you. See what you feel. I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. Do you think David's trust in God was renewed through this confession? Yeah. Would it have been renewed if he simply tried to hide his sin? No. That's deceit. You can't do that. You don't arrive at freedom and wholeness and peace and hope without being vulnerable. So here is more of the background. David had just been reprieved by God from Saul trying to kill him again. And so in 1 Samuel 27, 1 through 2, then David said in his heart, are we up there? 1 Samuel 27. We're looking, there it is. Ooh, that's small. Then David said in his heart, now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. Does that sound like he felt vulnerable? Yes, he did. Was it based in fact? Yes, it was. Saul was trying to kill him. Maybe he should have felt vulnerable. Is that right? Afraid of harm? Yeah. There is nothing better for me than I should escape to the land of the Philistines. The Philistines were the sworn enemies. They invaded Israel, Judah, over and over and over. And so when David decided that God wasn't enough to protect him, he fled to the enemy. That's the same thing as we do. Do you believe that? If I don't trust God, where do I find my security? In my own wisdom. That's what he did here. He fled to the enemy. That's what we do when we're trying to be invulnerable. He felt vulnerable. He's making a huge step. There's 600 men and their families that come with him to go and live with the enemy. And he's welcomed. So there's nothing better for me than I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me and any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. That's his wisdom, right? Can you recognize that? So David arose and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. So, do you think that David was going to be safer living with the enemy than he was in the wilderness of Judah? Wonder. So David tried to make himself invulnerable. So I'm going to repeat something. See, I don't know a whole lot, but things I do know, I'm going to repeat a lot. So if I try to be invulnerable, there is no path to freedom and wholeness and peace and hope. There is none. And so that's where David has put himself squarely in this place. So the trust and peace and hope wasn't available anymore. However, when we do something like that, it's not unusual that it looks like it's working. So 1 Samuel 27:4 says, and when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. So on the surface, did David make a good decision? Saul wasn't chasing him anymore to try to kill him. So did it look like it? The same is true when we try to be invulnerable, when we have shame and we just want to cover it up. It doesn't make the shame go away. It doesn't lead to peace and freedom and wholeness and hope, right? So that's not where David was going to get to either. So it feels, when we try to be invulnerable, it feels as if we made a good decision. That's unfortunate. But there's consequences. 1 Samuel 27:10, when Achish asked, where have you made a raid today? Because David and his 600 men, they were warriors, and they went out raiding because that's what the Philistines wanted them to do. So they did. They went out raiding. David would say, against the Negeb of Judah, so Judah, he was attacking Judah, he said, against the Negeb of the, don't even know how to pronounce that, Jerahmeelites, or against the Negeb of the Kenites. All of those people were living within Judah, what was called Judah then. So that's what he told his host, King Achish, the guy who he was placing his trust in. So in reality, he was attacking the Amalekites and others like that. So that means that David lied. When we try to be invulnerable in order to cover our tracks, we will lie. This isn't just David. This is us. We will lie. Does lying lead to freedom and wholeness and hope and peace? No, not even close. So in 1 Samuel 27:11, then it says, and David would leave neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath, thinking, lest they should tell about us and say, so David has done. Such was his custom all the while he lived in the country of the Philistines. He lived there 16 months. Not only did he lie to cover his tracks, but he found that in order to cover his tracks more thoroughly, he needed to murder people. Murder people. So when we become invulnerable, we end up doing stuff that we would not otherwise do in order to try to cover our tracks, because we think the covering of our tracks will help us feel free and whole, right? And it's a lie. It's a deception. So David ended up deceiving everybody around him, his 600 men. He was trying to be invulnerable to help them too. I'm sure that's some of the rationalization that happened and so on. So he ended up lying to them and lying to his host, the king of Gath, and especially to himself. He believed that it was working, even though he was compromising stuff that he knew was wrong. So, David covered his tracks. 1 Samuel 30, 1 through 3. You can read more of this if you want, of course. 1 Samuel 30, 1 through 3. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, there's a background here. After David had lived there for 16 months, then, as was the habit of the Philistines, they formed an army and they went to attack Judah. And so since the king had been deceived, he invited David and his men to go with him to fight Judah. That's their place of origin, you know? And so he invited them, and they were going. They were with him. But when the other kings of the Philistines saw that David was there, they said, this guy slaughtered us. He slaughtered us in order to protect Judah. Even if it looks like he's going to go to battle with us, it's not true. He might turn on us in the midst of the battle. And they said, send him away. And so reluctantly, the king of Gath did that, sent him away. In the meantime, something had happened in the city that they had been living in, Ziklag. The 600 men had families. David had 2 wives and numerous children and so on. And so they had left those all behind in order to go to war against Judah. But then they were sent back. And this is what they found. 1 Samuel 30, 1 through 3. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. You know, the Amalekites that David had been attacking, they attacked back. Big surprise, right? They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters were taken captive. At this point, David's efforts of being invulnerable resulted in his men hating him and trying to kill him. If I try to be invulnerable in order to try to find some peace or something like that, that's what happens. I introduce myself into the realm of the enemy. David was full of deceit. He was full of murder. He was full of all that stuff. And so the outcome of that in part was the burning of Ziklag. Everything they owned was destroyed. And God was gracious enough to give David the ability to repent at that point. So 1 Samuel 30, verse 4 says, Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. Psalm 32 is a result of David having to take inventory once again. It was right in front of him, and the inventory wasn't good. It was a place of shame and guilt and pain. For not just him, but for those around him as well. So if I tried to tried to avoid this, what happens to my relationship with my wife? Does it get better? No, I end up being deceitful just like David was to his men. And the same is true for all our relationships. If we try to be invulnerable, our ability to be honest and open is gone. That's why there's no ability to approach God for his freedom and wholeness and peace. There's no ability for that. So the consequences for them were really significant, and then God was gracious enough to give it all back. So that Psalm 32, I'd encourage you to read it on your own and let it sink in. Because David trying to be invulnerable resulted in all these things that he then got to confess. Same is true for me. In my effort to be invulnerable to, for example, my mom, resulted in my judging her, of being bitter towards her, to try to protect myself from the vulnerability I'd felt as a young man. Did it work? No. That bitterness didn't just stay with my mom, it grew. Anybody that disappointed me, then they became subject to my bitterness too. So that's why trying to be free and whole and to have peace and hope has become so valuable to me because I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. Lindsay used the word desperation. I think that word is related to despair. And that's what I experienced, was despair, much like your desperation. And so, the applicability for me, my life mission is to have peace and to become free and whole and to help others get there too. If you know me very long, that's the kind of stuff, the questions that I talk about. That's what I want. So I am intentionally vulnerable with people, and especially with God. I've come to understand that trying to protect myself actually isolates me from people and from God. And then there's no path to freedom and wholeness and hope and peace. There's no path. So, and through that vulnerability with God and with you, increasingly, I live into the freedom and wholeness and peace that Jesus died for. Do you see? He took my vulnerability as well as my shame and bitterness and all the sin that I could do, because he wants me to be free and whole with peace and joy and hope. That's what he wants for me. Sophie. So for your application, I'm going to give really pointed questions. And if you find that you need to come and confess, if you feel that you need to come and confess, please do. There will be people here to pray with you. I'll be over here. We have oil to anoint you if that's a part of what needs to happen. But this is about giving you the opportunity to be free and whole. So I'll ask the questions directly. Are you free and whole? Do you have peace in your soul? Do you want to be free and whole? There were times I did not. There were times in Lindsay's story that she did not. And so one of the first steps is being honest and open, to start with that vulnerability. Honest and open with myself and with God. The path goes through being vulnerable to get to peace and freedom and wholeness. So if the words that you've heard today, or the songs that you've sung, the testimony that you heard, if those are prompting you to want to become more free and whole, today is the day to decide to do that. And it starts with the vulnerability of confession. We don't become clean without it.